Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, chaos in Minneapolis. A woman in Minnesota allegedly attacking ICE agents who then fire shots in response. Officials are calling it an act of domestic terrorism. Ariane Posdar has the details. Allegations of a massive fraud scheme in the North Star State took center stage on Capitol Hill today. Lawmakers held their first public hearing with a witness alleging retaliation against whistleblowers. Melina Weiskup with the highlights. President Trump announcing a historic oil deal with Venezuela as the U.S. seizes 2 more sanctioned oil tankers, and the White House discussing options to acquire Greenland. Mariotsu at the White House. And the Trump administration today briefed Senate lawmakers on Operation Absolute Resolve and laid out their plan for future relations with Venezuela. Luis Martinez on Capitol Hill. Travelers from 25 more countries will need to pay up to $15,000 for a visa bond before entering the U.S. It's meant to deter visitors from overstaying.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. President Trump defends law enforcement after another alleged attack on Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents. Authorities say a protester used her car to try to run over an ICE officer who fired shots in response. NTD's Ariane Posdar has the story and a warning. This report includes footage that some viewers may find disturbing.
It was an act of domestic terrorism.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem giving details on what officials describe as an attack on ICE agents in Minnesota. A DHS statement reads that rioters began blocking ICE officers, and one of these violent rioters weaponized her vehicle, attempting to run over our law enforcement officers in an attempt to kill them, an act of domestic terrorism.
ICE officers were out in an enforcement action. They got stuck in the snow because of the adverse weather that is in Minneapolis. They were attempting to push out their vehicle and a woman attacked them.
Footage posted by the Citizens app shows the final moments of the incident. An officer tries to open the door of the car when the driver starts to back up. The woman then appears to change course, going forward in the direction of another officer who then reaches for his gun and fires.
An officer of ours acted quickly and defensively shot to protect himself and the people around him. And my understanding is that she was hit and is deceased.
Homeland Security also says the agent who fired the shots used his training to save his own life as well as those of his fellow officers. Authorities have not yet released the identity of the deceased woman. President Trump weighing in as well. He says some of the protesters at the scene were, quote, professional agitators. According to the president, the driver violently, willfully, and viciously ran over the ICE officer, who seems to have shot her in self-defense. It is hard to believe he is alive, but is now recovering in the hospital. Trump added that the situation is being studied and that these incidents are happening because of the rise in attacks on law enforcement. DHS also states that today's incident is the consequence of attacks on officers, citing a 1,300% increase in assaults against law enforcement and an 8,000% increase in death threats. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz sending the following message to the Trump administration.
We do not need any further help from the federal government. To Donald Trump and Kristi Noem, you've done enough.
Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey is blaming ICE for the woman's death, saying the agent wasn't acting in self-defense. He's also calling on ICE to leave Minneapolis.
They're ripping families apart. They're sowing chaos on our streets. And in this case, quite literally killing people.
The incident happened south of downtown Minneapolis, 1 mile from the location where George Floyd died in 2020. Ariane Posdar, NTD News.
Joining us now is Kyle Scheidler, Director and Senior Analyst for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism at the Center for Security Policy. He's also the editor of the book Unmasking Antifa, 5 Perspectives on a Growing Threat. Kyle, thank you for joining us tonight. Now, tensions are already beginning to flare in Minnesota following this killing, with protesters this afternoon showing aggression towards police, driving them out of the crime scene. In your assessment, though, what are the chances this shooting sparks retaliation from anti-ICE and other far-left groups, and what could this look like?
Well, I think it's probable. We have already seen in some far left extremist social media calls to use arms, to take up arms against police in response to this incident. So the rhetoric is certainly hot. It is certainly there. We've seen attacks, violent perpetrated ambushes against ICE officers in the past already. So it's certainly within the skill set of some of these far left extremist actors.
Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey this afternoon accused federal immigration agents of, quote, causing chaos. He said Minneapolis is demanding ICE to leave the city immediately. What do you make of the mayor's response, seemingly putting the blame on federal agents here?
Look, none of this would be happening if the state of Minnesota and the city of Minneapolis did not illegally act as a sanctuary city trying to shield criminal illegal aliens from deportation. If they cooperated with the federal government and federal law enforcement in upholding immigration law, as do most of the states in this country, they wouldn't be having these kinds of situations. They deliberately inflame these situations with their sanctuary city policies. And then when federal law enforcement attempts to uphold the laws they are sworn to do, they take the side of radical protesters against the federal government.
Now, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz this afternoon announced that he issued a warning order to prepare the Minnesota National Guard to, quote, protect Minnesotans from rogue ICE agents. How would an order like this work, ordering state law enforcement to act against federal law enforcement?
Well, in practice, I don't see much likelihood of that being the case. In all likelihood, I think probably Governor Walz is trying to get ahead of President Trump ordering the Minnesota National Guard to Minneapolis by having the state activate them first. I don't anticipate that there being a real probability of conflict between the National Guard and federal law enforcement. In most cases, they have very good cooperating relationship. If need be, President Trump could certainly federalize the Minnesota National Guard if Governor Walz was to attempt to use it in a way to prohibit federal law enforcement officers from doing their job. That certainly has sort of shades of some of the incidents in the 1960s where the federal government deployed National Guard and even active military forces to some of the southern states to uphold civil rights legislation and to enforce desegregation. So Tim Walz really is finding himself on the wrong side of history here with some of his rhetoric.
And Kyle, according to the Department of Homeland Security, by November of 2025, assaults and violence against ICE officers was up over 1,000% compared with the same period in 2024. Now, DHS has placed blame on the rhetoric from, quote, sanctuary politicians. Now, you've studied radicalization in radical groups for many years. Well, most regular Americans would never harm law enforcement. How, in your experiences, this kind of messaging interpreted by already radical individuals?
Well, I think what it sends the message is that if they attempt to foment a riot or an unlawful assembly, they can expect some level of political cover. Where far left extremists think that they will get political cover from local or state politicians, they have a tendency to be a little bit more aggressive. We've certainly seen that in the case of Portland, in Oregon, in Seattle, in Washington State, for example. In places where they know they will not get political cover, these sorts of protests tend to be disrupted relatively early. They tend to stay more peaceful. And I think it really is important for the politicians in some of these areas to get out ahead of this stuff and say, look, you can have whatever political opinion you want. You are allowed to be upset. You are allowed to protest lawfully, but we will not countenance any criminal activity. We will not countenance rioting. We will not countenance attacking police officers, whether local, state, or federal. But when you have politicians who don't use that kind of language, they are certainly leaving the door open for bad actors.
And Kyle, you spoke earlier with NTD about this potentially sparking more aggression. What do you think needs to happen next in order to prevent rioting like we saw in 2020?
Well, I think first and foremost, the governor of Minnesota, the mayor of Minneapolis, they need to come out and say, look, be peaceful. do not engage in criminal activity. We cannot be, you will not convince us to side in favor of rioting against the federal government. Unfortunately, that's not the kind of language we're seeing right now, but it is the kind of language that would have a positive effect in keeping things calm. And unfortunately, that's just not the kind of language we're seeing deployed right now.
Lots to watch for here for sure. Kyle Scheidler, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Allegations of a multi-billion-dollar fraud scheme in the spotlight today on Capitol Hill. Lawmakers held the first public hearing today, with one witness testifying that government officials retaliated against people who tried to report the fraud. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has the takeaways.
House lawmakers on the Oversight Committee are exposing a multi-billion-dollar fraud scheme taking place in Minnesota. Around $9 billion meant to support Minnesota programs may have been stolen since 2018, a federal prosecutor reported last month. House Republicans on the committee this morning criticized Minnesota officials for not acting quickly enough to stop it.
Governor Tim Walz, Attorney General Keith Ellison, and Minnesota's Democrat leadership have either been asleep at the wheel or complicit in these crimes.
The Childcare fraud scheme was first exposed more than a decade ago, between 2011 and 2013. But one state lawmaker who appeared as a witness today said that those who tried to initially report the fraud faced government retaliation.
They revealed that retaliation now includes threats of being fired with cause, which means you do not get unemployment insurance in the state of Minnesota, being blacklisted from all state agencies.
The Democrats' witness, a former DOJ official, pushed back on the idea that fraudsters haven't faced repercussions, highlighting the consequences that some have faced so far.
The department has charged over a dozen people for stealing $14 million from a program meant for children with autism.
The state's governor, Tim Walz, has repeatedly defended his handling of the fraud crisis. But since the crisis has been exposed on the national scale, Walz has since dropped his re-election campaign for a third term. Some Republicans aim to expose that some of the stolen money was used to fund Democrat politicians, even the state's attorney general.
Did money flow to Mr. Ellison's campaign a couple weeks later from some of the folks who were in that meeting?
Sure did.
How much, do we know how much that was?
I do not have that number.
So it wasn't just overlooking the fraud. They were actively trying to make sure this program continued, and then they benefited from that politically with contributions to their campaign, all in this same year, all in 2021.
Many people involved in stealing these federal dollars are of Somali descent. Republicans are urging the Trump administration to deport and denaturalize these alleged criminals, while Democrats are urging the public not to demonize an entire group of people based on the actions of a few.
We don't need to make these partisan hearings. Every American has a stake in making sure that they have a receipt for where their tax dollars are going.
Minnesota isn't the only state under the microscope. The Trump administration has also opened an investigation into California and halted $10 billion in funding for social service programs in 5 Democratic states.
I think it is very widespread. We're just scraping the surface right now.
Today's hearing was the first of multiple fraud-related hearings. Chairman Comer has called on Governor Walz to testify in February. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
President Trump announcing a historic oil deal with Venezuela. Under its terms, Venezuela will purchase only American products with the money made from the U.S. selling Venezuela's sanctioned oil. This coming as the U.S. apprehends 2 more sanctioned oil tankers in the Atlantic. NTD's Washington correspondent Mario Otsu brings us more from the White House.
All eyes are still on Venezuela as the White House today confirms the seizure of 2 more sanctioned oil tankers. One of them, the Sophia.
This is a stateless, sanctioned, dark fleet motor tanker. This vessel was operating in international waters and conducting illicit activities in the Caribbean Sea.
And the other, Bella 1, the British military says was part of a Russian-Iranian axis of sanctions evasion.
The vessel this morning was seized in the North Atlantic. This was a Venezuelan shadow fleet vessel that has transported sanctioned oil. The vessel had a judicial seizure order and the crew, so that means the crew is now subject to prosecution for any applicable violation of federal law.
This comes as President Trump announced Tuesday night that the interim authorities in Venezuela will be turning over 30 to 50 million barrels of sanctioned oil to the United States, where it will be sold at market price. The White House saying the Trump administration, led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, is in close correspondence with interim authorities in Venezuela.
The interim authorities have agreed to release that oil to the United States, so it will be arriving here at home very soon. The United States government has already begun marketing Venezuelan crude oil.
Levitt says the U.S. is selectively rolling back sanctions to enable the transport and sale of Venezuelan crude oil to global markets.
They are not generating any revenue from their oil right now. They can't move it unless we allow it to move, because we have sanctions, because we're enforcing those sanctions. This is tremendous leverage. We are exercising it in a positive way.
Proceeds from Venezuelan crude oil sales will first settle in U.S.-controlled accounts, and then
those funds will be dispersed for the benefit of the American people and the Venezuelan people.
But we're going to market that crude. We're going to allow that crude to be sold so that revenue can be generated, but then we're going to control the flow of that revenue to make sure it's going for productive reasons in Venezuela.
Meanwhile, as the effects of former Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro's capture are felt around the world, President Trump warning other Western countries that his administration won't allow America's neighbors to be used as proxies for U.S. adversaries.
We need Greenland from a national security situation. It's so strategic. Right now, Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security.
President Trump says Russia and China have, quote, zero fear of NATO without the U.S., and that the only nation China and Russia fear and respect is the America that he's rebuilding. The White House confirms the U.S. is talking about what a potential purchase of Greenland would look like.
More control over the Arctic region and ensuring that China and Russia and our adversaries cannot continue their aggression in this very important and strategic region.
Levitt says all options are on the table, with the first option always diplomacy. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says he plans to meet his Danish counterparts next week to talk about the U.S.'s interest in Greenland. Reporting from the White House, Mariotsu, NTD News.
The Trump administration today briefed the full Senate on the military operation in Venezuela. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has the details.
Democratic and Republican senators praised the U.S. military for its execution of Operation Absolute Resolve. This after a briefing from 5 cabinet members led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio to the entire Senate.
Absolutely organized and very precise, and I guess they would describe its execution as flawless. And this wasn't some guys woke up in the morning and say, hey, let's shoot some out. Deep in my appreciation of our military and what they've accomplished for that.
The American military basically has the ability to shape events on the ground. Everybody after Maduro is put on notice. If you go back to the old ways, you'll pay a heavy price.
The Trump administration laid out their plan for future relations with Venezuela. And congressional Republicans agreed with the Trump administration that the removal of Maduro was not about regime change.
Step one is the stabilization of the country. We don't want it descending into chaos. The second phase will be a phase that we call recovery, and that is ensuring that American, Western, and other companies have access to the Venezuelan market a way that's fair. The opposition forces can be amnestied and released and from prisons or brought back to the country and begin to rebuild civil society. And then the third phase, of course, will be one of transition.
It is not a regime change. I want to emphasize that. It is a change of the actions of the regime. As you know, they have an interim president now, and so we're not boots on the ground. We're not occupying Venezuela. We haven't declared war on Venezuela. We went to get a criminal who had been indicted in a U.S. court under our due process, and we're going to bring them to justice on American soil.
Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Venezuela was once the richest nation in Latin America, but Nicolas Maduro and his predecessor forced a third of its population to flee over the last 20 years. NTD's very own Luis Martinez lived this story. He sits down with NTD's Steve Lance tonight. Here's a preview.
If you ask Venezuelans, we've been dreaming of this day for over 20 years. 8 million Venezuelans have had to leave their country. That's a third of the country. So, like, to put it into perspective, it's like if 100 million Americans had to leave because of a bad government that ruined the country. Back in 2007, 2008, there were 11 state coordinators for Caracas for the student movement. I left and I felt terrible. I had friends tell me that I was betraying the cause because, you know, I didn't stay and fight. Well, of those 11, 7 were jailed and 2 were killed. And thankfully, 2 of us left and came here to the United States.
That's really powerful. There's been a huge Chinese Communist Party presence. Maduro arrested, captured, the day before, meeting with high-ranking CCP officials, as well as the presence of Iran, Russia, Hezbollah, we're hearing, even in Venezuela?
Well, over the past 20 years, the Chinese Communist Party has lent the Venezuelan regime over $90 billion. Pretty much all of the gear that the National Guard in Venezuela uses to repress the Venezuelan people is Chinese equipment, and also the surveillance apparatus that is that has been established in Venezuela. The intelligence is all Chinese technology. China went into every country in Latin America and now has become the number one trading partner of every country. They went in and offered substantial amounts of money to buy natural resources, to buy ports that they control, and build dual-use infrastructure, install their own technology into the electricity grids, into the communications grids. So they've been able to have a strong stronghold on the region that is, as many people call, the backyard of the United States.
From the human cost of socialist policies to foreign adversaries in America's backyard, catch the full interview on One with Steve Lance tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And authorities say a protester used her car to try to run over an ICE officer who fired shots in response. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem is currently speaking at a press conference on this incident. Let's tune in.
Minneapolis. Because of the adverse weather that Minneapolis has seen in recent snow, one of the vehicles became stuck and ensnared in the snow. Law enforcement were attempting to push out this vehicle, and when a mob of agitators that were harassing them all day began blocking them in, shouting at them, and impeding law enforcement operations. ICE officers and agents approached the vehicle of the individual in question, who was blocking the officers in with her vehicle, and she had been stalking and impeding their work all throughout the day. ICE agents repeatedly ordered her to get out of the car and to stop obstructing law enforcement, but she refused to obey their commands. She then proceeded to weaponize her vehicle, and she attempted to run a law enforcement officer over. This appears as an attempt to kill or to cause bodily harm to agents, an act of domestic terrorism. The ICE officer, fearing for his life and the other officers around him and the safety of the public, fired defensive shots. He used his training to save his own life and that of his colleagues. He was treated at a local hospital, has been released, and is now with family. I encourage the American people at this point in time to pray for him, but also to pray for the deceased's family and her loved ones. Today alone in this country, there have been 4 different domestic terrorist attacks on federal officers by the ramming of vehicles. 3 of them happened here in Minneapolis. We've seen over 100 of these vehicle rammings happen in just recent weeks, and this must stop. ICE alone is facing a 1,300% increase in assaults against them and an 8,000% increase in death threats against all of them.
In fact, the very same officer who was attacked today had previously been dragged by an anti-ICE rioter who had rammed him with a car and drug him back in June. He sustained injuries at that time as well. And let me remind you why we're all here in this city today and why we've been here. In communities across this country and here in Minneapolis, we're just enforcing the laws that we have in this country. For years under President Biden, tens of millions of dangerous criminal illegal aliens, terrorists, and suspected terrorists were allowed to invade our country over our southern border. They were allowed to steal, to defraud, and to perpetuate violence against American citizens. Regardless of who your mayor or who your governor is, President Trump promised every single American that he would make America safe again. He promised every single American that he would work to protect them from dangerous criminals. Since Governor Walz has been in charge of Minnesota, we have seen homicides go up by over 50%. That's also during Mayor Frye's tenure as well. Since President Trump took office, Governor Walz has released over 470 violent criminals back onto the streets here in Minneapolis. He has another 680 of them still within his jurisdiction that he could give to us today to face the consequences for their crimes. Because Governor Walz and Mayor Frye refuse to protect Minnesotans and instead they protect these criminals, that's why we are here. And we didn't just show up yesterday, we've always been here. But we're surging operations because of the dangerous situation we see in this country and because we're no longer going to allow illegal criminals to damage and harm, to kill, to sexually abuse, to proliferate drugs, and to steal American taxpayers' dollars. This state has faced unprecedented immigration fraud. It's seen unprecedented benefit fraud. Individuals were allowed to come into this country and set up fake companies and fake nonprofits and divert billions of dollars away from American citizens and those vulnerable citizens who truly needed the services from those programs. This city has burned before, and your mayor and your governor let it happen. President Trump is not going to let that happen. He and our federal law enforcement officers are here to bring peace and to bring public safety and to ensure that criminal activity is stopped and that people who perpetuate it will face consequences. Since we have been here in recent weeks, we have arrested over 1,500 criminals off of the streets. Our law enforcement has arrested murderers, known and suspected terrorists, child pedophiles, and other brutal criminals that were protected here in this city. We should all work together to protect our citizens. We should all protect the men and the women and the families who live here in Minneapolis, who live in Minnesota, and live throughout this entire country. I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank you for focusing on the important work that our federal officers do and make sure that we're focused on the priorities of this country, and that's making sure that we're keeping people safe. With that, I'll take any questions that you may have. I say that he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's very clear that this individual was harassing and impeding law enforcement operations. Our officer followed his training, did exactly what he's been taught to do in that situation, and took actions to defend himself and defend his fellow law enforcement officers.
Secretary, can you expand too on the agent's injuries? The president said that he's lucky to be alive.
The officer was hit by the vehicle. She hit him. He went to the hospital. A doctor did treat him. He has been released, but he's going to spend some time with his family.
Can you clarify whether he was hit before or after the gunshots were fired?
I can't, but the FBI will continue the investigation and release more facts when it's appropriate.
Has the agent been relieved of his duty, or can you give us any other insight?
No, we're following the standard protocol procedures we do in situations like this. When there's an officer-involved shooting, we make sure that we get the facts and that we are getting the statements from everybody involved and make sure that investigators are handling the decisions.
Have ICE operations paused because of what happened today?
No, we're still out on the streets doing our work to get dangerous criminals off of the streets of Minneapolis.
Can you give us any insight into your conversation with the governor?
You know, Tim and I have known each other for years. We served in Congress together. We both ran for governor the same year and have served as governor at the same times. So we were colleagues, and we discussed what happened here today. We have two very different viewpoints of it. I talked specifically about the fact that we have laws. They need to be enforced. He knows that I believe sanctuary policies have protected criminals and placed a priority of them over the citizens that live here, and he knows we'll continue to do our work, and I encouraged him to work with us. We've never had a cooperative arrangement with law enforcement here. Whenever we've done investigations, whenever we've done police work, when we've been doing what we can to bring people to justice for the crimes that they commit, we haven't had the cooperation of the state of Minnesota or the city police here under the mayor's direction. If you talk to any of these federal law enforcement officers, they'll say that when they call for backup in a situation, that it's hit and miss. They were grateful today that the police chief and local law enforcement showed up at the scene and helped secure it to make sure that nobody was harmed and that the FBI could do their work. But I would encourage them to work with us, that we could form a partnership that would make sure that individuals have the opportunity to have a safe Minneapolis.
Will body camera footage be released?
Do you stand behind the use of force, and will any of those use of force guidelines be altered or changed in the future?
You know, it's clearly established law that a vehicle driven by a person and used to harm someone is a deadly weapon. Deadly force is perfectly lawful when a threat is faced by a weapon. So I do believe that this officer used his training in this situation, and we'll let the FBI continue the investigation to get it resolved.
The shooting happened happened before or after the vehicle hit the officer?
I know you keep asking that, but that doesn't mean that the FBI is going to give you an answer today. There will be an investigation. We want to make sure that it's factual. What I would ask is that as we go forward from here today, that we all remember that our job is to have peaceful discussions. I'd encourage our local law enforcement and state law enforcement to work with us. We are going to continue to operate here in Minneapolis and in the state of Minnesota to make sure we're going after dangerous criminals. One of the key focuses that we've had here is a focus on individuals who are sexual predators and are involved in child exploitation. When I was just here yesterday, we arrested individuals who were charged with criminal assault and sexual assault and people that exploited children. Why would you want to keep them on your streets? President Trump has promised to go after the worst of the worst, and that's exactly what we're doing in Minneapolis. By not working with us, Governor Walz and Mayor Frey are putting those criminals and prioritizing them over our children and our grandchildren.
Governor Walz said that he is not going to give any heads up when there is going to be.
That's simply not true. He said that to me on the phone too, so I'll get him the documentation that he needs so that he knows that we would love to coordinate with him. He doesn't give us access to any information on criminals, let us know who he's detained, doesn't honor our detainers, and has individuals and criminals in his jurisdiction that he won't turn over us today too.
You
Yes.
mentioned that the officer involved today was once before rammed by a vehicle. Can you explain the difference between that instance and today? Was a firearm discharged then? If not, what was the big difference?
I won't speak to that case right now, but we can get you the details and the information on that. But the facts of the matter is he's an experienced officer. He's been in situations like this before, and he certainly has been out there and followed his training today.
Are you going to change the way
People need to stop using their vehicles as weapons. This domestic act of terrorism to use your vehicle to try to kill law enforcement officers is going to stop. And I'm asking the Department of Justice to prosecute it as domestic terrorism because it's clear that it's being coordinated. People are being trained and told how to use their vehicles to impede law enforcement operations and then to run over anybody who gets in their way while they go out there and try to disrupt peace and public safety. And Americans deserve better.
Can you say why they were inviting the National Guard?
That hasn't been a part of the discussion. I know Governor Walz mentioned some of that earlier in his press conference, but we've got law enforcement officers here that will continue to work, and we're hopeful that the public recognizes that the work that we do every day makes America safe again.
With that, into the operation that was happening at 34th and Portland?
We had law enforcement officers that were out there doing an enforcement action. And a vehicle got stuck in the snow, and so they had called for other people to come and help them get that vehicle out. Those officers were trying to free the vehicle when the harassment started, when the protesters were out there impeding their vehicles and preventing them from leaving the scene.
Business in that intersection?
I won't speak to that.
Can you speak to the crime that person may be committed that you were going after? And you mentioned sexual crime. Okay. Will body camera footage be released?
I will let the FBI decide.
Were they on target today when they were in that neighborhood?
They were returning back to headquarters, I believe, to start a new operation, had just completed one. Well, thank you. What's that?
Was it an ICE vehicle that needed to be pushed?
I was one of the vehicles that ICE officers were using. But remember, when we operate in a task force model. So we have other federal agencies that work with us, and we're very grateful for that. We have CBP officers, the FBI, DEA, ATF, all of those all work with us every day in a task force model, and we appreciate it. We'd love to have the state police, and we'd also love to have the Minneapolis police chief and his team be alongside of us while we're out there doing those enforcement operations.
Were the agents there?
That will get you more information as it is revealed, but thank you and everybody. Let's work together to make sure that we can continue to help the city be safer, get more criminals off the streets, and ensure that our public has the opportunity to pursue the American dream in a city they can be proud of. Thank you.
More foreigners are now required to pay a $15,000 bond to enter the United States. The rule adds 25 more countries to the list, bringing the total to 38, aiming to prevent their citizens from overstaying their visits. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
Travelers from several countries will now need to pay up to a $15,000 bond to enter the U.S. Now, it's meant to deter them from overstaying their visa when they're here for tourism or business. The State Department has just added 25 more countries to this list, including Venezuela, Cuba, Nepal, Nigeria, and others. That brings the total to 38 countries. Officials say that these are countries with high rates of visa overstays, insufficient screening and vetting, and those that don't require proof of residency to obtain citizenship. So travelers from those countries are going to need to pay the U.S. Treasury anywhere between $5,000 to $15,000. The amount will be determined during their visa interview, and that money will be returned to the traveler if they don't overstay their visa. This comes as federal authorities are cracking down on illegal immigrants, including those that came in legally but then overstayed their visa. Here's Secretary of State Marco Rubio reiterating the administration's priorities at a recent State Department briefing.
There are people in this country who got in through some form of vetting that was wholly insufficient. There are people coming into this country every day to visit, to work, to live permanently. But you have to know who they are, and you have to have some limits and controls over what those numbers are.
The visa bond requirement for the newly added countries is set to take effect on January 21st. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
In the Middle East, protests have been taking place not only in Iran, but also in Syria and Israel. And in Jerusalem, police arrest a bus driver who allegedly ran over and killed a teenager protesting mandatory military service. NTD's Jason Perry has the details and a warning. This report contains footage some viewers may find disturbing.
Ultra-Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem were protesting mandatory military service when a bus drove through the middle of the crowd. And tragically, one of the protesters was seen hanging on to the bus's front bumper, holding on for his life as the bus continued driving. People in the area were seen screaming and chasing after the bus, trying to get the driver's attention. Unfortunately, the 14-year-old boy was killed and his funeral was held on Wednesday. Police say the driver was attacked by protesters and that the driver was arrested and was being questioned. Protests were also held in Syria on Wednesday in support of the Kurdish population in the northern city of Aleppo. The protests come a day after deadly clashes between Syrian government forces and Kurdish forces, also known as the Syrian Democratic Forces, which are backed by the United States.
We are now demonstrating to condemn the attacks by Syrian government forces against the Kurdish internal security forces. They want to sabotage, kill civilians, incite chaos, and oppress our people.
However, Syria accused the Kurdish forces of shelling a residential area, something the Kurdish forces denied. Thousands of residents were seen evacuating a predominantly Kurdish neighborhood in Syria on Wednesday. The fighting comes amid an attempt to merge the Kurdish forces with Syria's government forces. Protests continue across Iran as well over the country's failing economy. And on Tuesday, the son of Iran's exiled Shah called for the demonstrations to be disciplined, and he gave this message to the people of Iran.
I am sharing my first call to action with you this Thursday and Friday, January 8th and 9th, starting precisely at 8 p.m. Wherever you are, whether in the streets or even from your own homes, I call on you to begin chanting at this time. Based on your response, I will announce the next call to action.
Reza Pahlavi also posed a question to Iranian security forces, asking, quote, "On which side of history will you stand, with the criminals or with the people?" Iran's top judge also commented on the protests.
If anyone comes into the streets for riots or to create insecurity or supports them, then no excuse remains for them. The matter has become very clear and transparent. They are now operating in line with the enemies of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Jason Perry, NTD News.
Congress returned for a second classified briefing today on the U.S. operation in Venezuela. Lawmakers are sharply divided along party lines over the president's authority to use force without congressional approval. NTD's Arlene Richards breaks down the arguments and the laws that apply.
Since the capture of Venezuela's former dictator Nicolas Maduro, Congress is divided over the legality of the military operation. On Wednesday, Congress was briefed for a second day in a row. But the briefings have sharpened the partisan divide over the president's authority. Some Democrats say the strike was an act of war, which would require approval from Congress.
This was not simply a counter-narcotics operation. It was an act of war. But this was a military action involving Delta Force, involving the Army, apparently involving thousands of troops.
Top Republicans have rallied to President Trump's defense.
We are not at war. We do not have U.S. armed forces in Venezuela, and we are not occupying that country.
Republicans largely say the operation was legal and justified.
This was one that did not require prior authorization by Congress. It just required notification. And all the administration officials did exactly what they were supposed to do on the timetable they were supposed to do it in.
Is there a law that authorizes a president to order a military operation in another country without prior approval from Congress? Republicans rely on the Constitution. But the interpretation of who has the power and when is considered a gray area. Article 2 says the president is the commander-in-chief of the military. Meanwhile, Congress has the power to declare war, raise and support armies, and maintain the Navy. The National Constitution Center, a leading nonprofit platform for constitutional education, states that the president can command the military in operations approved by Congress. But he can also deploy the military without congressional approval. So was the military strike on Venezuela an act of war that needed approval from Congress? Under the War Powers Act, a president can deploy troops to another country on a limited basis, without congressional approval. But he has to tell Congress about it. The question is, when?
The War Powers Act states that notification should be made to Congress within 48 hours following the initiation of hostilities.
In addition, the military must leave the country within 60 days unless Congress provides a declaration of war. According to House Speaker Mike Johnson, the military has already left Venezuela. Since the act was passed in 1973, presidents of both parties have often used limited military force abroad. For example, President Ronald Reagan invaded Grenada in 1983 to protect American students without first consulting Congress. President Barack Obama didn't get congressional approval for his 2011 airstrikes on Libya to protect civilians and bring down Muammar Gaddafi. And Trump, in his first term, twice ordered strikes on Syria over chemical weapons use without specific authorization from Congress. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Miami is on the front lines of a crisis thousands of miles away. Today, city official Rafael Rosado spoke about how instability in Venezuela is spilling over into South Florida, affecting crime, migration, and families in the city's Exile communities. NTD's Chris Bob has more.
Inside the Miami City Hall early in the afternoon, City Commissioner Rafael Rosado and other local leaders addressed Miami's commitment to standing with Venezuela and communities pursuing democracy, human rights, and freedom. Rosado warned that political instability abroad continues to fuel crime, narcotics trafficking, and humanitarian strain at home, issues he said Miami residents are very familiar with.
For years, Miami has been ground zero for Venezuelan narco trafficking. I think we all know this extremely well, too well. The Maduro regime's drug networks have brought deadly fentanyl to our streets. They have fueled addiction. They have destroyed families. They have tempted and endangered our children. For the Venezuelan and Cuban exile communities, this moment carries deep emotional weight.
I spoke with Rosado after the conference. He said he's hopeful that illicit networks like Tren de Aragua, which have had devastating consequences for families across South Florida, particularly within Venezuela and Cuban exile communities, will be eradicated.
Well, hopefully a number of folks are captured. The reality is that Maduro was not just a dictator, he was a narco trafficker, and he kept the government afloat, and in many ways the government of Cuba as well, afloat through illicit activities. And so hopefully this helps to bring about a change in that, and we can make our community even safer. Now, Miami is at historically low crime rates. Nonetheless, we know that a lot of the activity that's still negative in our community stems from, it originates from Nicaragua and Venezuela and other places where they're struggling, and where the government has been complicit in all sorts of illegal and illicit activities. And we hope that this helps to stem that.
Rosado called Miami a city of exiles and argued that regional instability continues to shape its culture.
It is measured by generations that have been forced to flee a country that they love with their hearts. It is measured by the lack of survival for too many lives. Miami understands this pain very well, perhaps better than any other community. In addition to our Venezuelan community, Cubans, Nicaraguans, and other exiles from everywhere around the world who have escaped authoritarian ideologies, they have been forced to rebuild their lives in freedom, and they have continued to fight for the rights that they were denied back home. Today, Miami stands united more than ever.
So I understand that it's all very fluid right now, but ideally what we'll have in the next few months are free elections in Venezuela, and I think that may give people the opportunity to perhaps travel back and forth freely if that's what they would like. We want folks to have that choice, and so we're supportive of changes, we're supportive of the federal government's attention to this incredibly important issue, and we hope that it has a domino effect on the rest of Central and South America.
In the meantime, Rosado says support starts at the local level as Miami residents continue to advocate for democratic reforms and stand in solidarity with communities already here.
What can we do? Well, at the very ground level, showing them that we are supportive of the community that exists here in Exile, right? We're multiple Exile communities. We should be supportive of one another. But in addition to that, obviously our local delegation is very well connected to the President of the United States, to the Secretary of State. These are folks that have homes here. Some were born here, and so there's constant communication to see how we can help them and encouraging them to continue to move forward and establish democracy in Venezuela and the rest of South America and Central America.
Chris Bob, NTD News, Miami.
House lawmakers condemn a recent attack on protesters by a Chinese consulate security guard outside of the Los Angeles consulate. The guard can be seen spraying a chemical spray several times at the demonstrators, landing some of them in the hospital. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has more.
Absolutely unacceptable. Trying to inhibit the freedom of speech. No way, shape, or form is that acceptable in any way. And I hope, the hammer is brought down on them.
Free China! Free China!
About 24 pro-democracy activists were celebrating the capture of former Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro outside of the Los Angeles Chinese consulate on Sunday. They were also calling on the Chinese Communist Party to end its authoritarian suppression. After some verbal exchanges, the consulate's armed security guard Wu Xian can be seen on video making some threats against the protesters and then spraying them with a chemical spray. The demonstrators say that at least 8 people were sprayed, 5 of whom received hospital treatment. A group organizer says he was in the hospital for 10 hours. According to his medical evaluation, he experienced burns to both eyes, a dry cough, shortness of breath, chest pain, nausea, and vomiting.
Ever since Tiananmen Square, we've known that China will use techniques that are unacceptable, and it doesn't surprise me that even in the United States, China would do that.
We believe that there is freedom of speech here in America. We don't always have to agree, but we need to be respectful to each other and our differing thoughts.
Obviously, that's extremely concerning if you're seeing, force used against people who are peacefully protesting, especially protesting in favor of democracy, and if it involves foreign elements, that's even more concerning.
The security guard Wu was arrested by police shortly after the incident. The Los Angeles Police Department confirmed that a suspect was taken into custody for allegedly violating a state law provision governing the purchase, possession, or use of tear gas or any tear gas weapon.
My Venezuelan friends told me that when people fight for freedom back home, the government shoots them. That immediately made me think of China's June 4th. Our suffering hasn't ended. We hope that one day, like Venezuela, we can also bring an end to authoritarian rule. I urge the U.S. and the international community, just as you once helped the Venezuelan people push back against Maduro's regime, please also support the Chinese people.
Some of the protesters also say they plan on filing a civil suit against the security guard demanding compensation. Jason Blair, NTD News.
Coming up, from interactive toys to wearable tech, companies are unveiling new products on day 2 of the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. Christina Corona reports from the show floor. And in the NFL, the league announced their highest full-season TV ratings in more than 3 decades. Dave Martin joins us to explain why when we return. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. It's day 2 of one of the largest tech shows in the world. The Consumer Electronics Show is underway in Las Vegas, where companies are unveiling what's next in technology. NTD's Christina Corona has more from the convention.
We're back for day 2 at CES in Las Vegas, where companies are showcasing how technology is changing everyday products. From toys to wearable tech, let's take a look and see what gadgets are on display. Lego is rolling out what it calls the Smart Brick. It looks like a regular Lego piece, but it can react to movement and sound.
It's just a 2x4 Lego brick, except that it's packed with sensors and smarts. There's no screen inside. There's not even a power button on this thing. But the Lego Smart Brick responds to what kids do, generating reactions to their actions.
It can detect distance, motion, it can even change colors and make sounds based on the object that you're making. It even fits into any Lego set. The company says they want to bring completely new dimensions to Lego play, allowing kids to use their imagination.
If they already have Lego bricks and they have something built, if they have an audio brick and tags, they can bring it into the creations that they already have, and interactive minifigs, of course, and so they can bring it all into their world.
RoKid, a China-based company, is here showcasing smart glasses that provide helpful tools like navigation and on-screen information about the things that you're looking at.
Real-time translation. It supports over 89 different languages in real-time translation.
RoKid also offers a version of their smart glasses that uses audio to assist people with vision impairments.
Like vision is important, right? But for people, they have a vision impairment. They don't need to see, but they really need the audio. So this one is quite useful for them.
San Francisco-based Subtle Computing showcased its smart earbuds designed to pick up even a whisper in noisy environments. The earbuds use built-in microphones and on-device software to focus on the wearer's voice, allowing for dictation, calls, and voice notes while filtering out background noise. CES continues until Friday with more product announcements expected. Reporting from the city of Las Vegas, Christina Corona, NTD News. Now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty going on. We have college football news, but let's start in the NFL actually, because the Nielsen TV ratings are in, and the league enjoyed their highest viewership in more than 3 decades this past season. What could all of this be attributed to?
Well, there's probably multiple factors at play there. I mean, for one thing, this isn't a presidential election year where pretty much all of the ratings really take a bit of a dive. Of course, that's only 1 out of every 4 years. But this year's average TV ratings for the NFL, 18.7 million viewers. That's compared to last year when they had 17.5 million, so about a 10% increase from last year. But this can also be attributed to, a change in how Nielsen's viewership is actually counted. Now, previously, they only measured the top 44 media markets, which accounts for about 2/3 of the country. They now have ways to account for more viewers, so that's certainly got to be a big part of it. Now, if you remember back to Thanksgiving Day, we saw record TV ratings for the Chiefs versus Cowboys. That was that late afternoon game. Now, both teams are very popular, but of course, neither team was actually in the playoffs, and of course, neither team actually made the playoffs. So maybe this record isn't a total surprise, though. But Tiff, I mean, I didn't really enjoy watching this season very much. I mean, both the Jets and the Chiefs didn't make the playoffs. I mean, the Jets, that's an every year thing. But the Chiefs, I mean, they've won 3 of the last 6 Super Bowls here. So, we saw their demise this year. So maybe people tuned in to see that. I don't know. Some people are kind of sick, unfortunately, that would actually want to watch the Chiefs' downfall this year. I thank you for you not doing that, right, Chip?
You don't want to see a new dynasty?
Well, the fall of this dynasty, Mahomes getting injured, it was a sad story.
I mean, Mahomes has been posting. Looks like he's going to come back stronger than ever.
Well, we hope so, but that was a pretty tough loss. And who knows, maybe Kelsey won't even be there for him next year. So for me, it was a very sad season. It's too bad that people tuned in to see all that.
All right, well, we'll bring a tissue box for you next time. Shifting gears to college football, though, Miami coach Mario Cristobal, whose team plays tomorrow night, didn't dismiss the idea that some former players of his in the transfer portal could be contacted for insider information.
Yeah, he was pretty blunt. I mean, he said, this happens all the time, but he also said he recognizes, this is the system that they've created. The transfer portal opens up during the playoffs and players get contacted, and players can anyway get contacted for inside information on their own team. It's probably not the only problem here. Now, we saw last year Penn State's backup quarterback entered the transfer portal while his team was in the playoffs. And if he waits till the season ends, the transfer portal, quarterback carousel can stop spinning by that time, and there won't be as many teams that are interested in him. Now, meanwhile, you're usually off the team as soon as you enter the transfer portal. I mean, it's tough to practice play and then do research and do interviews on what team you're going to play for next, all at the same time. Now, fortunately for Miami, their opponent tomorrow night in the playoffs, that's Ole Miss. They have so many issues going on right now with Lane Kiffin taking his assistants with him to LSU and them hoping to get them back to help them coach in the game. It's a lot going on there right now. So I doubt they even have time to do that right now, Tiff. Though if they did, it is legal. But right now, it's kind of the wild, wild west in college sports at this point. There's not too many rules governing all that's going on.
All right, well, on the same topic, Oregon coach Dan Lanning previously has stated that the season should end by January 1st every year. Is that something that's feasible?
Yeah, I think it's feasible. I think it's very reasonable, too. As soon as the playoffs end, you can just have the transfer portal open, which would eliminate a number of these issues we were just talking about. And Lanning said it right when he said that every playoff game should be played every single weekend until the season ends. Right now, there's like a 10-day delay between each round, including between the regular season and when the playoffs actually start. Meanwhile, every other level of football, I mean high school, every other level of college football and the pros, they don't drag out their postseason like college football does. They play every single weekend. But this level of college football, that's the FBS, they really had their postseason messed up by the bowl games many years ago. I mean, it was a long delay to play them. First of all, their season would end in November, and then they would play those bowl games really mainly on January 1st. And it really wasn't a playoff, though. The winners did not move on to play each other. So then, they created the BCS and they created that 4-team playoff. Now we're up to the 12-team playoffs, but they still won a number of games on New Year's Eve, which was always when most bowl games were. It just creates major timeline problems. I would fix this if I was the president of NCAA.
All right, well, Davis Always, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.